All right. Wow. How are you?
Mm. Yeah, I'm very well. I've had a nice time. I was in Switzerland for a week. Got back on the weekend, and
Sweet.
yeah, it was really nice to be in the mountains,
You were
decompress
you
from the
were with
city.
the Davos crowd, were you? Like making plans to rule the universe and all that kind of
Mm,
thing.
yes.
Gray aliens.
Yeah, yeah. No, I was there with some friends, and yeah, there's an apartment from auntie and then the grandmother, some connection like that. So we got to stay there for free.
Wow, that's awesome. That's beautiful.
Mm.
Switzerland is really nice. I
Mm.
have several Swiss friends, and one of my best Swiss friends is a conductor and music teacher in San Francisco. His name is Urs, and he's a great guy, man. And I love the mountain Swiss.
Mm.
They're lovely people, really.
Mm.
Did you ski at all?
So I went snowboarding for 2 days,
Oh man, that's
and otherwise I
fantastic.
worked a bit.
Oh,
Mm.
it's been a long time. So anyway, I'm Stephen, and this is Max, and I'm really happy that Max. Can I call you Max, Maximilian?
I prefer Maximilian.
Okay, Maximilian. So yeah, Maximilian's a new friend of mine that I met through the Game B social network, and we've had a few conversations and kind of became friendly. And so I'm always happy to talk with Maximilian. Sorry about that. And he's doing something very interesting that I wasn't very aware of or familiar with. And tell me if I'm wrong or not, but it's ontological coaching, is it?
Hmm.
Is that how you call it? And so
Yeah.
that's some form of coaching that helps people. I found a definition just looking around. Do you mind if I share it with you? And then I'll ask you to
Hmm.
describe it, what you think that is. But before that, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit so my audience of like 23.567 people will understand a bit more about you?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for the introduction, the short one. Yeah. So my name is Maximilian. I'm working as an ontological coach. I've been doing that now for 1 year officially. But when I started working as an ontological coach, I actually noticed that a lot of the things that I've been doing in my life kind of have led up to that profession. I studied sociology in my academic kind of career, and that I steered towards phenomenology and also ontology, so more the philosophical side of sociology. And then a couple of years later, which was when I started working as an ontological coach, all of that kind of got swept back up and has found application in my work.
I think that's cool because there's a journey there, and it kind of circles around and comes back in through
Mm.
different avenues into something deeper, maybe, or more important
Mm.
to you, and then it turns into something that can become a calling or uh, a vocation, and that's very interesting. I love it. I love those kind of journeys where you start off on one path and there's lots of relatable or related avenues around it or domains, and you kind of meander through these different domains and find a certain
Mm.
spot that feels comfortable, and then frame things from within that and build something out of that. I don't know. That's just my own personal thinking.
Mm.
Anyway, I read
Yeah.
this thing just really quickly looking at it. There's a lot more to it. I realized that when I started uh,
Mm.
searching. But anyway, this kind of has a bit of a marketing speak to it, but we can forgive that. There's something in
Mm.
there that's interesting. Maybe you can expand on it. And then I was thinking, how it might relate to some other things. Anyway, ontological coaches are skillful facilitators of profound learning that generates genuine transformation and more powerful and constructive ways of engaging with different aspects of life and work. So they say like a way of being, which reminded me of Tao Te Ching, or way of life, or Buddhist kind of frame or thing. So what do you think? How would you describe what you do?
It's always a great question because ontology in its basis has a very kind of trickster-like quality. So I just want to kind of preface that a little bit, that working in the realm of being is difficult to grasp because it's not an external thing that we can like point to, but it's all around. It's a way of being. It's an experience rather than a description. And so just that as a little like prelude to trying to explain what ontology, or rather ontological coaching, is. Within coaching, there's kind of a spectrum of working facilitatively and then moving across to working, we could call it ontologically or transformationally. And the facilitative side is very much what we kind of know in the public sphere of coaching, which is very much, I want to get X. How can a coach help me to get X through tool Y? And that can be very doing based, we could say. And it can sometimes be quite shallow because the goal is set on a, let's say, superficial level, and all of the strategies, the attempts to support the client in getting that, stay on that level. And that's important, but it's just the one side of coaching, which is the facilitative side. And then you can move across a little bit more into, we could also call it metaphysical side. So if there's the physical act of getting the thing you want, there's also the metaphysical side of who are we being in the context of getting what we want. So the question of who am I becoming, who do I want to be, and diving a little bit deeper into who we are. The kind of, I think repeating it at that point, but it's really an exploration into the internal patterns of how we're showing up in the world, how we have responded to the world in all of the years that we have lived. And so that's another side of coaching that we can look at. In ontological coaching, or rather the lineage in a certain way I've been learning in, we try to combine the two because we see a necessity in the doing side of things and the being side of things. So when a client wants to achieve some sort of goal, we can ask, cool, what would you have to do for that to be created in your life? But we can also ask, who would you have to be for that to naturally arise out of your life? So there's this kind of beautiful interplay between these two levels, going really deep into this question of being and then coming back into the physical, into the question of doing.
Yeah. I can see all that because I can see how things integrate, and I can see the interdependence of those various perspectives and ways of being or experiencing, like you talk about phenomenology, obviously. And there's so many basic elements to it. Like I was thinking when I was jotting down my thinking, trying to imagine after reading a couple of things, but yeah, you have the existential realm, obviously. And that's more concerned with freedom and choice and things like that, right? And obviously, you can't divorce that from any experience of being, right? And Sartre wrote that book, Being in Nothingness, right? Which is kind of a challenging book to experience. Sometimes, have you ever read that? Being in Nothingness?
No, I haven't.
Jean-Paul Sartre. Anyway, he was a big French existentialist and quite interesting. I recommend you look into that. and also A Happy Death by Albert Camus, because even though it's considered existential, like The Myth of Sisyphus, Albert Camus, and like, why do I roll the rock up the mountain all the time? And it's just going to fall down. What's the meaning in that? You have things, having to do with meaning as well that are very, very deep. And this can come from the spiritual thing, I guess. And then you have the, what would you call it? Mechanistic, maybe, or scientific type thing, looking at stuff, perspective or frame or whatever you want to call it. And then you have maybe the naturalistic side of it. How does it fit into nature, or how does it emerge from nature and whatnot? So when I think about ontology, I know it's wrong, because I guess it's a really profound field in and of itself. But if I were thinking about coaching from that particular perspective or frame, all of that would come into play. It would have to. So, whatever you call something, like, I think that approach that you're looking at is better, because I don't know about all the schools, like they have so many different cognitive behavioral therapy, how do you call it? Different kinds of approaches to the therapy. And I don't know off the top of my head what they are, but there's a bunch of those. So, it can also be very nauseating and frightening, in the sense that once you're learning more and more about yourself, or about all of these kinds of things, you get a too much information type of feeling. I would say it would be scary and disorienting. And then you have to somehow bring that back into, your way of being, and then you have states of being, like you were saying, the phenomenological side of things and whatever. So when obviously you can't bring that up, all these kind of philosophical things, when you're talking to somebody who's dealing with profound questions relating to the self and their experiential aspects of self, and expressive aspects of self, and practical aspects of self, and all that. So how would you start off with somebody just who's completely like not thinking about it in the terms that I would naturally think about it? All these things would just pop off in my head. I'd say, okay, I'm ready. Let's tackle all these different things. But what would you do, to warm somebody up to engaging in this process? And then once that's happened, give us an idea of what the process would be. What do you do when you're talking or whatever?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the simplest way to kind of access these levels is just to ask the client what they want. And in this question of what do you want, there's a real depth to it. And typically it will start with just something simple. Maybe I'd like a new career, or I'd like to write a book, or I'd like to make X amount of money at the end of the year. Whatever the thing is, the first answer normally is quite mundane, let's say. And I would continue to ask. As an ontological coach, we don't just stop with the first answer. We ask, cool, why would you want that? And so maybe this, if we were to take the example of writing a book, then they say, well, then I would finally be able to express myself. So that in itself is already a deeper answer to the question of what do you want? Well, why would you want to express yourself? Because if I express myself, maybe I can finally be seen for who I am. So now we're already getting into a little bit more of the existential, identity-based questions of being in the world. So then we can ask, what's the experience that you're wanting to have out of that? I want to feel whole. I want to be seen for who I am. I want to know myself deeply. Okay. So the book then becomes a tool and a function to move into those deeper layers of existing and being a body, being a thing in the world that perceives and experiences. And that was a very just simple kind of explanation of that. But of course, the path to it is sometimes filled with much more resistance, much more distortion, or the internal dynamics of the client that have kept them from touching this deeper part of themselves will come up in the process.
Right.
That's also why we would use.
Yeah, I can imagine that, obviously. Once you start asking questions, obviously answers provide challenges and also reveal constraints or difficulties or challenges, right?
Yeah.
I don't know why for me, but it happened a long time ago. I was often asking myself, what do I want? Why do I want it? And how am I going to get there? So these questions were really fundamental to me. And so in failure, it didn't seem to bother me as much because all those questions were being answered by participating in something or doing something, or like you say, having a goal to write a book or whatever. And even if you fail, you're answering questions along the way if you're looking deeply into those questions. Why did I even want to do that in the first place? Why did I like that girl, who broke my heart? Things like that. Fundamental experiences, formative experiences. And then you're asking yourself after maybe failure in business or whatever, why did I fail? How am I going to succeed next time and whatever? But then all of this circles back around to a deep thing within yourself, because I always find out that there's a flaw within me. There's something wrong. I'm deficient. I'm all fucked up. And something is holding me back from ideal expression or achievement or whatever. I just watched that movie King Richard, after seeing what's his name, Will Smith slap the comedian. Jesus. Then I watched that movie. It's about the tennis players, the Venus and Serena Williams, And I was watching that movie thinking, I don't get how these girls were just so well trained or so willing to be well trained, who they were was so ingrained or so integrated with their father's ambition, and they were so comfortable with it. It's almost like destiny, something weird that's unspeakable or unknowable, So as you circle around from all these questions and get back to yourself and maybe realize or confront your deficiencies or your worries and fears and whatnot, there's something ineffable or mysterious about unanswerable questions, right? When somebody runs into the unanswerable question, where do you go from there?
To me, it's not so much about the answer as it is about the relationship we have to the seeking of the answer, if that makes sense. So it's more about the attitude that the person comes into this question and a potential answer or non-answer, depending on how the dice fall.
Right.
And it's really like the more I'm working in this field, the more I'm realizing and stabilizing this idea of it's all about relationship. It's about relationship to self. It's about a relationship to the world. It's about relationship to our desire, to our problems, our needs, all of those things. And that to me actually feels much more fundamental than the thing itself, because the relationship is, we can change it. It's something we can get to know and shift, either coming from, on the one side, kind of hate and distrust and not wanting it, and the other side, compassion, acceptance, allowing, and softness. And the object of that is not so important in a certain way.
Again, all these things have to dovetail together, I think, because they're so fundamental. So, yeah, I mean, the journey and the relationships and all that kind of stuff. But I still think there's something there that's mysterious that can't be explained.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that can't be even sought out, but you know it's there. Like, I don't know, like you're in the woods and you feel like you're being watched, and you know, maybe nothing's watching you, it doesn't really matter, but you sense it, right? Something's going on underneath. And I don't want to use that term because I think it's so weird, but you know, the substrate or whatever, you know, of consciousness, or that human thing, which separates us from everything else we know of in the universe and the animal kingdom, you know, our consciousness and our particular kind of humanity, and what kind of mystery traditions are involved with that. You know, there's a ground in religion, there's a ground in spirituality, there's a ground in science, there's a ground in nature. And there's also a danger in all of those things. When you misperceive them in certain ways, they can become pathological, right? So I think if somebody's really concerned about who they are, what they want, how they're going to get there, if it's an obstacle for them to flow or whatever, what kind of potential pathologies are there that people might have to confront or deal with? And then where would you go if you found one as a coach?
I want to be careful in like generalizing the answer, because I think how an individual gets to that point of like existential, let's say, destability, is very unique, and I think needs to be respected, and there needs to be reverence for that process. I'm actually going to speak a little bit from my experience in that regard, because I think it's too difficult to generalize it.
Yeah.
And I'm a little bit too cautious to do that. In my experience, when I first started to be interested in self-inquiry and spirituality and starting to meditate a lot, I was unconscious and unaware that I was actually trying to, in a certain way, like leave the world. In a certain way, like maybe it's a harsh way to say it, but like a spiritual suicide, i.e. not to kill the spirit, but to kind of not have to experience the world in its physical reality and everything that comes with it. And so meditation kind of was a tool that I would use for that. And so that brought me more and more into a place of like, it felt like stabilizing, but it actually was more destabilizing, because I was moving away from the realities of physical life. And it was for me at some point then to realize, this was maybe 3-4 years ago, where I realized it's not about turning away from the world and kind of transcending, as you could say, because, you know, everything is an illusion and the self is an illusion, and you're just trying to get back to source or God. But that it's about like turning around and going into it. It's going into the self because it's there, going into that depth that is there. And part of that journey is being in a relationship with everything around me and being a part of this physical existence. And just to clarify, it's not as though I didn't live life before and didn't enjoy life and was active in the physical world, but on an ontological level, that was happening. Yeah. And so if I hear this question of how, pathology that can come up in this realm of existentialism, or this realm of, what is the ontology, I would actually kind of keep circling back to just being with what is here and accepting what is here, dropping into reality. And that's a loaded word, but just simply like feeling the body, feeling the heat, the cold, feeling when we eat an apple, what it feels like, what it tastes like, what it smells like. Certain way to get back to that and then rebuild from there into how we want that experience to be. I hold ultimately a kind of free will notion of living life. And I do think there's a possibility we have in shaping and becoming who we want to be and experiencing what we want to experience. It's not at a snap of a finger and we can't just manifest anything that we want. That's the other pathology of that thought line. But there's a possibility to shape our life and to influence what we experience.
So yeah, that's important because there has to be, we don't have to be so mamby-pansy or whatever you call it, of, like, I'm hopeful, it's all about hope, but you come to the realization that there are possibilities that you're in control of to a certain degree. This is a fantastic thing to figure out when you're in a slump, right? Suddenly it's like, oh yeah, there's some things I can do, and I choices I can make that can shift things, and sometimes you get in a bad slump, you don't even know you have any agency at all. You feel powerless, hopeless, helpless, and sometimes I think that's how we're being trained by consumerism in a way. We think we have all this choice and agency, but we don't. We have a new smartphone every year in a different color, but actually that's not choice at all. We're just acting out a role as a consumer and thinking we need things that we don't, but that's a different thing. But when I was young, I used to think in terms, well, my term for it was present mind or present mindedness. And this is before I knew anything about meditation on any kind of deep level or practice. But I remember profoundly, as a child sitting in a room watching dust float through the air, in front of a window with a curtain and just kind of being in awe of watching that for some reason, or just like you say, hanging out in nature and playing and just being fascinated by everything and having this incredible imagination. This is something that, when we lose that, when we lose our imagination to any degree, to me, it's a tragedy because it cuts out a lot of these avenues for possibilities and potential that we have. And it puts us in all these logical fallacies where we think there's only two choices or there's not a middle way or something like that. And I used to think of it as present-mindedness. So if I started to panic or feel uncomfortable, I would say, well, it's kind of cliche, but be here now, put your mind in the present moment and look around and see what really feels good to you, right? Or what's scaring the shit out of you. And then confront it in some way and realize that you can face it, People need coaching all the time in organizations to have a difficult conversation with a person because they may not be used to it, right? And so we avoid difficult conversations or difficult situations, and then eventually it becomes the bane of our existence because we can't live in the moment, right? So we start going down into all these fantastic realms and avoiding what we are. Meditation can be escapism. There's no doubt about that.
Yes.
When you have that feeling, I just want to go sit in a cave, and experience my being, period. And have all those, not solipsism per se, but have all those barriers between me and the universe just disappear, and experience that harmony where there's no reason to harmonize because you're part and parcel of everything. You're like the holographic mind, And in each tiny little subatomic part of you exists the whole universe. Everything dilates, time dilates. I've had those experiences in solitude or meditation or sailing or hiking, sometimes long, arduous journeys like that. Like if you're walking the Hadrian Wall at the, near Scotland and Northern England, and you just decide just to kind of walk all the way. Or people do these long hikes and whatnot. I can imagine they experience a lot of things like that, where everything falls away. But you still have to find a grounding in the world, because we exist in, like you said, in relationship with everything. And I also think people sometimes forget that they have a relationship with nature. And they have a relationship with science, whether they know it or not, and with philosophy and with knowledge and all these different domains, We don't realize it sometimes. And reconnecting with those relationships, or even realizing that we have them, is a profound thing.
Yeah, and I really think it's, perception is relationship. There is no perception without relationship. There always has to be two things or objects that are in space for us to have perception. And so, like, dropping back into relationship, it allows for example, the profound dissolving or realization of everything being whole, but it also allows for a different perspective into physical life and how we choose to relate to things.
Yeah, shamanistic practices, for example, or like your spirit animal type of thing. And going back to a childlike form of imagination, if you can sit there for a moment, just try to imagine what it's like to be the dog or a horse or a cockroach or a fish or whatever. And having that sense of fascination, just wondering what it'd be like to be there. And of course, then our language butts in. And we start to try to think like a fish. And of course, fish don't think like us at all, probably, but we don't know. It's a profound mystery. Are dogs just humanized because they're around us? Or is there some aspect of dogness that intersects with humanness? And humanism is a huge part of things as well. How do humans relate to the world? So as we become more, we had the Protestant Reformation, and then we all learned how to read because we wanted to have a personal relationship with God, and then we got there, and things kind of evolved into a weird state where we're all Western educated, industrial, rich, and democratic. How weird are you? On the spectrum of weirdness, how weird are you? As opposed to indigenous cultures and so on. So on one hand, I want to see the Balinese be Balinese, or the Lakota be Lakota, or the Hopi be the Hopi, or whatever. Choose an indigenous whatever. On the other hand, I want them to have health care and live to be 85 and have light and books and stuff like that. Eat well and whatever. And healthcare and all that kind of stuff. Those are all relationships also, and how do you relate? My thinking is, like, I don't know why I think I can relate at multiple levels. Whereas some of my friends tend to think that the only answer to a problem in the world is a bigger military, better nukes, AI drones that can target, precision targeting or whatever. They have an answer, and it has to be like this, and that's all they can see. If you're a shaman from the Navajo Nation or whatever, and you still get in airplanes, and you have an education and a degree from the university and whatnot. So What do you think? I don't know. If people are in doing the kind of work that you do with them, at some point, are they better able to integrate these different ways of perceiving things, like you talk about perception, different ways of being, and feel more comfortable in a broader world where there's more complex domains than maybe we're naturally accustomed to from evolution, from an evolutionary point of view or whatever?
Yeah. So the practice in a coaching relationship very much is around the client's relationship to themselves. So that really is like the focal point of the work in a certain way. And first of all, in ontological coaching, we make an assumption that there is a self, and that this self is a unique texture or vibration or flavor. It's specific to each person. So we would say that each person has an essence that is distinguishable from other people's essences. And in the work, we do some exercises and speak about this explicitly to find and to have some language to describe this essence. And of course, the mystery, as you've mentioned, is always there. There's always a deep mystery of who we are. At the same time, we can use some signposts to identify and distinguish a little bit what this specific flavor of a person kind of is. And when this relationship to self is, let's say, deepened, improved, widened, there's more compassion for self, there's more understanding of self, there's more understanding of why we act the way that we do. That naturally and mysteriously translates to all other relationships we have in life. And this is really where it's ontological life coaching. It's not business coaching, it's not relationship coaching, it's not sports coaching, it's life coaching in its truest sense of the word, because it permeates. We start to talk about the relationship we have to things, like the fundamental way that we relate to ourselves and the world. And this, of course, permeates into every aspect of our life, from how we do the dishes to what kind of work we do, how we make money, how we speak on the phone, etc., etc.
Do you ever get into mythology and archetypes or any other kind of psychological investigation? I mean, does that ever come up just naturally, or are people interested in that in relation to themselves? Because I think of myself as an amalgamation of a lot of different inputs, but obviously, my microbiome and my vagus nerve and my brain and my synapses and cells and my face, my voice, all of that stuff is undeniable. I was born and I grew up and I made it this far, right? But inside there's all this programming, symbols and cultural aspects and whatnot, beliefs and ideologies. So you've got to confront ideology as well. That's a part of it, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah,
how big is all of that at the end of the day?
Yeah, it's massive, definitely. The question that you're pointing to is, how do we perceive and construct our reality? And there is a connection that we make in ontological coaching between belief, action, and world. So when there's a belief, regardless of if the belief is true or not, regardless if the thing we think is true or not, our actions are true. So maybe we believe that, actually I don't want to make it too political, but we can take any example of COVID was a man-made reality, a bioweapon. If that's a belief we have, our actions will probably be real according to that potentially, who knows, real or not real belief. And so we would start to act into the world and do things in the world and construct the world in a way that is in line with the belief that we have. And when that happens, our world changes. So it's not just a thought that just floats around somewhere, but it actually manifests into reality. So then we construct this reality. Maybe we are then in contact with more groups who think the same. We start talking to people that think the same. We start to see evidence. So just cognitive bias kind of is activated. And then we're in a world that is like our belief, that is based on the belief. And when we see this world, then we say, look, I can see it. This is proof that my belief is correct.
Right.
So that is like the feedback loop that then enforces it. And of course, that keeps going and grows and grows. And so always in ontological coaching, the basis, and you'll find this in spirituality as well, is noticing. It's the first step. Just to notice, I have this belief. That's already profound, to notice a belief.
Right.
And then to continue working like, if this is my belief, now I'm noticing how I'm acting because of that. Very interesting. And then we can notice how we construct our reality. I see now why my world is like this. And at this point, we haven't talked about changing it. We haven't talked about shifting it or doing anything with it. It's just noticing it.
I like that
And
a
it's
lot.
at that point, then we can.
Yeah. I love that because, this is something now that really makes sense or feels good to me. Because if you can help somebody notice something, they're doing the noticing. They're the ones noticing,
Yes.
right? And then they articulate it. They explain it. They figure it out. It's not a construct like some mysterious, magical thinking construct or postmodernist thing or whatever. It's just, I see how this was built in me, in my understanding of myself and the world and how I fit into that belief. Yeah, just helping somebody notice something, that's profound to me, I think, because so much of storytelling, so much of good relationships where you're really in a deep relationship with somebody, you learn something about yourself through that relationship, and you also help people notice things. That's what teaching is. So a big difference between human beings and other animals is that we pass on this information. It comes from the big network, from the hive mind, from the swarm, from the egregore, or whatever. We're slaves to fashion. We have ideologies that we picked up, or education, a certain kind of education, or we were brought up in a certain church or religious belief or whatever. And then I would imagine we notice how that was built or came about, and then various aspects of that. And then we notice that other people have also had that same experience or been subjected to those same things. That's humanizing, right?
Yeah.
Because you look and you say, oh, okay, well, gee, they're Russians, but they're people like me, and they picked up a lot of things from a lot of different places in a certain kind of way. And I can notice that that's a fact, not controversial or not something that, you can sympathize or relate to or have empathy for or whatever.
Yeah.
But
and I want to enforce this fact of noticing, because I think it's really important in this context then to trust someone to make the decisions that they need to for themselves is something we can only give them when we give them the tools to notice. Because if we don't trust that if they notice the reality, they will act in accordance to their own alignment. If we don't trust that, then we wouldn't want them to notice what reality is. Right. This is also kind of a shift, right? If I don't trust that you will do the right thing, I'm not going to give you the information so that you can make your own decision. And coaching works very differently, where it says we deeply trust the client. And we also said that the coach never gives the answer, never gives advice, because that would be breaking the trust of the client. And so the practice of being in a coaching relationship is to create awareness and notice the things that are there, trusting that the client can choose to change that if they want to, that it lies in their realm of possibility.
There was a good scene in that movie I told you I watched, King Williams or whatever it is, King Richard, or I forgot now already. But anyway, the Venus Williams, right? She gets, there's a structure to screenplays, right? The way the beginning, the middle, and the end, and the climax, and the tension, and the conflicts. But it dealt kind of interesting with that in a way because, her dad had been coaching her for years, since childhood. And she had a lot of coaching, obviously, but he was also really focused on education. Venus Williams is multilingual. She's a businesswoman now. Very well-rounded. It's mysterious how he built up that trust with his daughters, with his family. And then he was overbearing. And, as dads and coaches can be sometimes when you're trying to achieve certain goals that are like overt out in the world type things. But then she gets to this moment in the story where the wife tells the husband that she trusts him, even though she disagrees with him and he's stubborn and he's not getting it, that his daughter has to make certain decisions by herself on her own. And that if he can't trust her to do that, there's something really, really badly wrong with that. It's really a good part of the story. It's the best part of it, actually. But there's a not an epiphany, but a realization, I guess people have when they realize and decide that they can trust somebody, and that it's better to do that, Yeah. So on a bigger level, like, we don't want to be political, I get that. But, when you're creating supervillains in your world to fight and to blame things on, you're not getting it, They're just people. They're not supervillains. And the way we interact with them affects how they behave as well. And it affects how we behave. And trust is so huge. If you don't trust institutions, you have nothing. You don't have civilization. You don't have what we have now and have had for centuries. If you break trust, like the problems in the media and sense making and all of these things we follow, like the Consilience Project and whatnot, there's a huge lack of trust there. And I guess it all starts with your own sense of being. Can I be the kind of person who trusts? And like you said, a relationship with myself, with oneself. Do I trust myself to make the right decision? And do I trust, can I trust you to do that? It's a really big deal. I think the trust thing is huge. I don't see how one can be oneself really without that.
Yeah. So much. And it's so much of the work that I do with my clients implicitly, though. I mean, sometimes it becomes explicit and the term trust, is in the space. But a lot of the time it's implicit, because every time that I pose a question that comes from getting, how do I say it? Like, if I put you a choice, if I ask you a question that in a certain way demands a yes or no, right? Like, would you like to work with me? Would you like to have another session? Would you like to have a meditation before we start working? Do you need anything? Is there anything you need from me? Is there anything you need from yourself? Any of these questions that are putting the client at choice then practices this notion of trust, because they have to then choose what they want, with the consequence of, if they choose something they don't want, that is a reality. I said yes, but actually I meant no. aha, cool. How and what would we want to work on for that to be clearer? And then trust comes back into the picture.
And also now we're talking about a whole suite of communications skills.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Active listening, and well, there's so many things. I mean, when you talk about communication, right? I mean, you can read a dozen books on communication and practice it really hard and still not get it, and still not do very well at it. And that takes a lot of practice, right?
Yes.
So yeah, and then the things that come through the practice of good communication, right? Because all those preambles, it's amazing. You know, somebody would, I think some, like Venus, I'm sorry to go back to the movie, but she's like really thankful that she was given trust, right? It's a huge gift, gigantic. And that trust couldn't have come about the way it did without the communication, because that's the way we are. We communicate. And even with the outdoor cats that we have here that aren't domesticated fully, but they trust us. And we have boundaries, but you can sense that they appreciate and they trust a little bit in their own cat kind of way. And we do too. And there's a relationship there, even though it's between a cat and a human.
Yeah.
And there's communication there, even though it's cross species. And I think we can experience communication with nature and the spirit and all these kind of things.
Yeah.
But that's huge. And that's a big load of skill sets.
Yeah. And to simplify it as well, like trust is a state of being, right? So it's not necessarily what we say, you know, just as you explained with a cat, you're not speaking, but you're still able to communicate trust towards the cat, and the cat is able to recognize and feel that. And so as complex as it can seem, and, you know, bringing ontology as a word or big philosophical concepts into the space can make it very complex and big structured. But ultimately it's not. Ultimately it's getting actually back down to just being in trust, let's say. And so then the question becomes, how can we be in trust on a feeling level, coming from the heart potentially, rather than an understanding of what trust is and then just communicating like, yes, you're allowed to do this, but, you know, not the feeling and the being of trust in it. So that again is another, and that's kind of the mysterious part of the work, where you're using language to kind of get away from language, but language is still a really beautiful vehicle to do that. And it's at that point when you try to like understand this, the beingness of life, that it gets really confusing and it's difficult to speak to, and it has to just be experienced.
Right.
And you know, that's
I
really where
I don't mean to be flippant, but like
Uh-huh.
it takes a lot of cold reading to develop an intuition. So, you know, like if you're a psychic and you have psychic powers and so on, whatever those might be, it takes a lot of practice to express that and to connect with a client on that level. I don't care if you believe in that or not, it doesn't matter. But yeah, I think that what you're talking about too is so important if you're going to develop intuition and the abilities that you want to have to get to a deeper meaning of oneself and existence and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of practice. So if you were to suggest something or help somebody notice what they had to practice, what would you try to steer them towards?
First of all, we would have to know a little bit about what they want, because there's so many tools that can get us in so many different directions. So I think that would be the first part, to like, for the client to get, on the person to get really clear on what they want. And not just, oh yeah, that's what I want, but like, do I really want that? Is that something that actually touches me? And what words, what language can I find that I actually match with that? And when that has been established, then to be open to how to get there. Because the what is much more important than the how. Like me specifically, and there's a lot of people in the world, and I think that has to do with Western culture. We steer into finding out the how before we actually really know what the what. So, we figure out the different systems and try to get the right political structure and the right technical expertise before we really know what we're doing this for. So
Right.
that would be, I think, my
clarity of
advice.
intention, clarity of
Yeah.
where the desire comes from. Is it something you truly desire from a deep well of oneself, or is it something that you're just, if it's a want that you just got from, the culture? I always say people are slaves to fashion. There's another thing I bumped into, which I'll just bring up just for fun, kind of a little crazy break, because you kind of got to that technocratic aspect of things, scientific or technocratic or mechanical, engineering. Dude, we can engineer our way out of all the problems we have right now. We just need the will to do that, man, and invest some money. We have to figure out a way to make money, engineering our way to a better future, this kind of thing. I don't mean to be flippant, but it's kind of, I sometimes think that's so silly, right? Peter Thiel is going to take his 0 to 1 and go build an island, and it's going to be somehow socially engineered and psychologically engineered and engineered to be some kind of a paradise. But I'm not a utopian. I'm not. I don't believe in utopia, but I'm going to build an island that's a utopia. Personally, I wouldn't know how I could be myself in a world like that. I don't know about a Star Trek kind of world where everybody kind of agrees on a bunch of fundamental values that kind of allow for individualistic self-expression to also be integrated and coherent in a social sense, right? So, but that's what I want, hopefully, for the world. But for myself, I have to have all of those things deeply fitted together before I can even imagine that, right? Because so many things are really holding you back. So anyway, I ran into this thing called ontological engineering. So it's a computer thing, and it kind of folds into a lot of the lingo that some of the game B people use. But so it's composed of, ontological engineering is composed of, pardon me for reading, but so on the organizational part, you have a mission, you have requirements, objectives, goals, and scenarios. So you're already thinking scenarios, right? And that's connected on the right side to function. And that's a logical structure, behavior, interfaces, constraints, right? And then that flows back up to organization. And then that flows down to communication. So, and that for some reason in that communication box, they have protocol stack. So this is computer speak, and standards, right? Standards. And then right below organization, there's component. So type, attributes, ports, location. And then flowing from communication to the left-hand side, they have connector, which is types and attributes, environment, physical environments, and attributes. That's all interconnected with the components, the connector and the environment. And then the function and information is connected. So data, metadata, rules. And then on the upper left-hand side, you have perspective, contains objects, defines, exposes concerns. I'll put this thing in the description to this video, because I find it interesting to meditate on that, even if you're not a computer engineer, and even though it sounds technical and kind of weird, but I can see all of that in myself for some reason. I don't know why that is, but it just seems so natural to me to have that. So you have all these different attributes, skills, perspectives, all these different things we've been talking about, right? But it's not necessary, I don't think, for a person to achieve a lot of growth, to experience all of these things, right? There has to be some fairly simple and fundamental experiences that one can have through this process that can lead to other things, whether it's more complex things or deeper things or different things than one's used to or whatever. So in a nutshell, do you have any way to illustrate that?
Yeah. In the lineage that I have learned through, we use a saying which is being a clearing for, which is to say, if us speaking here, I get a sense of you, that you have a drive, a depth of clarity, and a creativity. It feels like you're playing in the different realms and you're weaving in and out of different areas. And so by you being that, you are a clearing for that kind of experience in life, which you are allowing it in yourself, and it allows me.
Can you explain a clearing again? A clearing, what is that?
Yeah.
Explain
Yeah,
that.
so so I'll explain, because it's a relational term. So you being a clearing for that means that I can step into that as well. Because you are allowing yourself to do that, you're allowing yourself to have those qualities, you are creating a space for others to also have that experience.
Interesting.
So this is causing me to be like, oh, okay, if I'm speaking with Stephen, he's really allowing me, and he's modeling to me, I can feel it, that I can be clear, I can be driven, but I can also play in that. I don't have to take it so seriously. Okay, so this is an experience like Maximilian, I'm having, like, okay, because I typically want to be really exact, maybe a bit of my German culture is coming into this, and it's like, actually, I don't have to, I can do both. So even while we're speaking, you're being a clearing, you're modeling the being of playing in the field of exactness, if we want to call it this.
Wow, I like that language, and I like playing in the field of exactness. Wow, that's interesting. I love that language, because it doesn't have to be a clarity of thought or some kind of sudden understanding of something, but making space, or showing people the space or the potential, potentiality of being a certain way, or doing a certain thing, or thinking from a certain point of view, or whatever. I think that some of that, for me personally, comes from just the story life that I've had since childhood, and the love of stories and the desire to tell stories. So that's a part of me, But also I rebel against stories, because sometimes I think they're self-serving and self-serving, I guess. Not authentic, or not purposed to provide a clearing, a way to play, but that's something.
And what that,
go ahead.
What that shows, just to deepen that, like, of course, naturally, you would be concerned about that, because that's a deeper part of you, right? If part of who you've been in this whole life has been telling stories, let's say, you naturally are concerned about what we can do with stories that you don't want to happen, how we can manipulate with stories. Right? Where someone who doesn't have that deeper in their being, that's not a topic. They're not so close to it. It's not the air they breathe.
Mhm.
And also just to simplify even more this concept of a clearing, when we see a child play on the playground, they just have so much joy, and it's light and it's easy, and you can see they're not thinking about it, they're just doing it. And then everyone around it who looks at this child starts smiling, right?
Yeah,
They suddenly are allowed to be in a similar mode.
I
Oh, look
see.
at, what a beautiful little child playing there. And then suddenly their energy is activated in us as well. And so this, being in the world and creating clearings isn't something we think about actively necessarily. A child doesn't, stand in front of the playground and think, okay, I'm going to be clearing for joy in the world, so I'm going to go in the playground and be joy. It just is joy, and it suddenly creates a clearing for everyone around him or her to be joy, for example.
Yeah. And like it's not projecting necessarily on the cats when
Mm.
you just like to watch them play or sleep
Mm.
or relax, and you're just like, I get something really profoundly nice about
Yeah.
that. There's something really
Yeah.
beautiful and
Mm.
comfortable, comforting, and I can sense the joy, even though do cats feel
Yeah.
joy? I don't know. They look like they do. So I just like you
Yeah.
get that smile on your face and whatnot.
Mm.
And I think some people just who are a little more analytical um, or stuck on that side of things a little bit more, they might not be able to find that clearing, you know. So I've known people who are very analytical people who, when I watch them reacting to the joy of children or their children or whatever, I see it as I get a sense that they're being performative, that they're not really feeling it for some reason, you know. And I don't want to say anything because I don't know if that's true or not, but I get a sense that they don't know how to look at a playground and just, they don't just naturally react that way. So if if
Yeah.
if I if I thought that was a problem, if I was like a very analytical person and I thought, gosh, I don't understand how these people can look at a playground and just smile and kind of empathize and feel the children's joy and hearken back to it and feel the nostalgia, which is a good thing. I I know I'm supposed to feel that way, and I kind of feel that way because I can see it, but don't really feel it. What do you do if somebody came to you and said, I really want to feel
Mm.
that?
Yeah.
I mean, is there
Yeah.
something you can do? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll bring two aspects into it. So the first one, just quickly, someone who's analytical is also clearing. So someone who's very precise is a clearing for care, potentially, right? That person is allowing the world to also care so meticulously about something. So a clearing is in every aspect. Every person is always being a clearing for something because they are always being something. But let's say this person wanted to experience more joy. I think the first place where I would look with the client is to see, in a certain way, why are they not experiencing the joy? Is it because they don't have the joy? Or maybe it's more that they're scared of having that joy, which is distinctly different. One is I don't have it, I can't have it. And the other is, actually, I have this deep inside of me, but somewhere along my childhood, my life, I was informed, programmed, had the belief that being joyful is not okay. And typically that would point to some sort of survival mechanism. There was a reason why this person chose not to express
Right.
joy because it was safer in their reality.
Yeah.
And so then that becomes a very different topic. And when the client realizes, oh, actually, it's not that I don't have joy, it's that I have not allowed myself to be joy. That just opens up a lot, and it can be very confronting. It can be quite difficult, and all the resistance that is there will rear its head, because when I say, actually, I want to experience joy, all the mechanisms in me that have informed me not to feel joy, they're going to be louder. Like, you're trying to feel joy, but if we feel joy, we're going to die. So don't feel joy. And then all of the sneaky strategies will come up of avoiding that and creating a reality where joy isn't allowed. And even in what we talked about before, like if there's a belief, if I experience joy, I will, be harmed, then the person has probably created an environment. Maybe their whole job, their whole career is based on not having joy. And so their reality is protruding with this belief. And so shifting into joy doesn't just mean reshaping it internally. It's not just a reframing, it's a recreating of life. How would my life look like if I was allowed to have joy? Well, I would probably have a different job potentially. I wouldn't want to sit in a cubicle. I want to be outside. But that movement then is a massive confrontation, and all the resistance internally that hasn't allowed that to happen will come up. So that's exactly where one then works with a coach to be like, holy shit, I'm trying to experience joy, but look at these things come up. Awesome, great noticing. So we're back to noticing. Would you like to transform that? And then the conversation can be started.
For some reason, I was thinking also, because I really get what you just said here, and I like it a lot. I was thinking also about escapism and the utility of that, not just escapism in a negative sense, where you're trying to avoid reality, but in a creative sense, right? Because when I was young, I had very nice parents, right? But back in the 60s, people liked to drink a lot. They'd have parties and drink a lot. And any kind of problems that ever arose in my family was always fights or whatever, little problems. Didn't have any big ones. I was lucky. But it always kind of came through that, this kind of, we're all excited about life and having fun and getting really drunk. And then it leads to a certain crash and then into a fight or a confrontation. When you're a kid, it can be really scary, and you're like, oh boy, the parents are back home from work and they're drinking vodka, oh shit, what am I going to do? And when I was a kid, I would watch some of the Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf kind of confrontations between my parents. And I trusted them. I knew they loved me and they were good people and they loved each other. So it wasn't like so abusive that you're just in a horror story. But I would just take a step back and direct it, just think about the characters and what's going on and how I would shoot it. Would I have a wide shot here, close up, what would the music be like? And I would pull myself out of it a little bit. And I escaped through, again, that layer of storytelling that I would put on. That was a defense mechanism. But it was interesting. It helped. So I guess there's you have to explore that as well, I mean, what are you escaping from? Why are you escaping from? Is it a really negative thing? Is it something that's more like a creative pathway, artistic, that kind of thing? Because you can escape into art and just disappear,
Yeah. It's beautiful what you're bringing into the space, because it's exactly how we work with essence. So, for example, for a child, in this case maybe you, to have a creative strategy to escape the conflict that is there, once we realize the creativity of it and the depth of that, it's not like we would say, oh, that's a survival mechanism, to be escapist with creating a story. We don't just push it away and say that's something that we don't want, that's the shadow. Rather, we would actually kind of take it to us and say, wow, look at the beauty, look at the essence in that. Because there's an essence of creativity, this child, or maybe you in this case, has created a really beautiful, very creative strategy to be able to live more happily, more comfortable, and survive the environment that the person is in. And so it's even in this example of this analytical, very caring person, we wouldn't say, cool, get rid of the analytical, caring side of yourself, but let's actually move into that and allow it to open up, not as a survival mechanism, but as your essence. That
Oh,
like care
interesting.
is the basis of that.
Oh, okay. I see. Yeah, that's where the essence part of it comes. So that totally makes sense now. I mean, abstractly or metaphysically or whatever, I don't know what essence is, right? But now I get it. I get it. I understand.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is the for me, on the one side, the frustration, but also the beauty that I'm trying to understand and explain it through language, but it doesn't work. In a conversation like this, at some point it can be experienced. And right, like you sharing from your childhood and from your essence in a certain way is the connection needed to for that to drop in. Actually, I'm coming from my creativity rather than from some, survival mechanism. The basis of it is creativity. And so that is really a really fun process working with clients where in the process that at some point kind of clicks and it drops in. And then suddenly things start to make a lot more sense, not just cognitively, but yeah, I feel that. And it shifts the process.
I like the Vedantic idea of, illusion and samsara and ignorance and whatever. And I like the journey, up and across when you're growing in wisdom, I guess, knowledge and wisdom. So in the beginning, you get a little bit of an insight or you learn something and you go straight to the top and think you're really smart. And then you learn right away that you're not because, you confront the complexity and the reality of what you're dealing with. Oops. And then you fall straight back down to the I don't know shit realm. You're kind of languishing and struggling in the I don't know shit realm for a long time. And then you kind of move back up thinking, well, it's more complicated than I thought, but that's okay. I can work with that. I can try to figure that out. And then you start the arduous journey of really getting into something like playing the guitar or whatever it is. And you realize it requires a lot of work and a lot of practice. I mean, it just doesn't come that easily. And it may take a lot of effort to get there. And you start moving. And then you get to a point where maybe you have some mastery, a certain degree of it in something, or maybe you've cleared something or you've become aware of something or allowed something or whatever. And then you get to that moment when finally you kind of sense the flow and maybe you're kind of experiencing what it might be like to be wise, but you immediately know after that you can't be. Wisdom isn't like that. And you say, hey, it's complicated. This journey never ends, And even when I'm dead, it doesn't end. Whether you believe in an afterlife or not doesn't matter, So, yeah, I think that's interesting because if you can be that way, where that arduous, sometimes horrific, difficult, painful journey of learning whatever you have to learn, when you get to the pinnacle of that, you realize you're nowhere near and it doesn't matter. It's okay. That's a huge thing, I think. I don't know how that works with what you do, like the wisdom thing. I get so annoyed with the gurus and the intellectual influencers and whatever. They always tend to get to a certain point and then they get stuck. And I notice they're stuck. But people who are still on the journey are just trying to get to where they think they are, the guru, the master. And that's not a facilitated process like what you're talking about, which is what I would prefer. from a relationship, from a journey of self-awareness or understanding or skill, you know. Like if I were going to do the German thing and become an apprentice and then move from that apprentice that I learned everything about doing something from to another one that does the same thing but in a different way, to another one who does the same thing but in a different way. And then suddenly I have apprentices under me and I'm teaching them in a totally different way. And it's all good and there's a lot to be absorbed and experience and learn from that. And when you let them go, they know they don't know shit and that the journey just began. And soon they're going to have the responsibility to be in relationship with their students or their apprentices and bring them up to a certain level where you can push them out of the nest. And they're going to be fully formed, healthy, hopefully good human beings that can provide value to the next generation or the next person that's interested in it, you know. So that wisdom journey kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think the key in that, which you're speaking to, is in a certain way the unattachment to what has been learned. And I think a really deep teacher will hold that in their being, that they're aware that yes, this is a tool that, you know, the apprentice is learning, but it's not the way. It's just a way that is current and kind of being used at the moment, but that within that there's already a sense of like you're learning this so that you can then do this better in the future, that you can actually let go of what I have learned because you are to find your own path in this, to find your own way of creating your own mastery, which is defined by the person and the individual and not by an external measure.
So you have the epistemic humility. Can you have the ontological humility as well, and the existential humility as well, and the ideological humility as well? You know, all of these different things, that whole whatever the cool guys talk about, the stack, you know, whatever's going up and down the stack. But yeah, in all of that, you have to find the humility. There has to be that. But it has to be, I think, real humbleness comes from a very deep appreciation of the whole thing, what is, you know. Like I used to tease people and say, it is what it is, it was what it was, and it shall be what it shall be by virtue of having been. So go ahead, take that journey through the tenses, the past, present, the future, and you know, okay, it is what it is, whatever, you know. That's a pretty big clearing.
Yeah.
I guess we'll pause and stop there. What do you think?
Yeah, it feels good.
Because there's a lot going on here and I really like it and I appreciate it. Wow, I'm so fortunate to have had this conversation with you because, yeah, it's brought things into perspective and it's made things more clear about what it is you do. And I think it's an important thing for people to engage with. I think, yeah, it just sounds exciting and interesting to me. So I wish you all the best in practicing this, and I see it as your calling. And I'm really, really fortunate to talk to you. So, Maximilian, my friend, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
All right, buddy.
Awesome
Let's talk again soon anyway. Anytime you want to, and I appreciate it. I mean, I'm gonna spread the word.
Awesome. Maybe I can share in that context. I'm starting a podcast in April, so just in a few weeks, and there I'm going to be circling this whole idea of becoming self. It's the title of also of the podcast, and it's going to be an exploration on kind of the like metaphysical or the meta level of like, what does it mean to become self? How do we even approach that topic? So talking with like coaches, transformational figures, and just people generally in the space that are taking these perspectives. But then also just speaking to people who have somehow dropped into some part of themselves that are now then expressing it. So artists, poets, athletes, entrepreneurs, I'm going to be talking to. Just this whole concept of becoming self. It's, maybe through this conversation, it's clear that I'm fascinated by this. And so I'm going to be starting a conversation in that context as well.
Awesome. And one day I'm going to be selfish and ask you to talk to me about the process you use to develop an episode for a podcast and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to figure that workflow out myself. So
Likewise.
yeah, this really helps a lot. So if I think of something, I'll share it with you. Okay.
Awesome.
All right, man. So if you don't mind, later on, message me any contact details you want me to include in the description of the video.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I'm going to put a little slide thing in there of some things that I think we naturally covered without thinking too much about it. All right, my friend, let's talk again soon.
Yeah, let's do that.
All right, buddy. Cheers.
Awesome. Bye, Steven.
See ya. Bye-bye.